Timothy Bleifnick became popular for appearing on a popular family TV show, The Family Feud, where he said some startling things about his wife. But a few years later, he was again in the headlines for brutally murdering her. She was found dead and had been shot 14 times. This murder, like most, sent the whole town into an instant shock and ripped the hearts of the deceased family into shreds with grief. Why did Tim murder the woman he had once loved and even shared a considerable number of years with? Let's find out in this heart-wrenching story of Tim Bleifnick and Rebecca Postle. The town of Quincy, Illinois was known to be a relatively peaceful town with hardly ever an incident of crime and violence. It was nicknamed the Gem City. Everyone loved and looked after one another. But everything changed on February 23, 2023, when Tim Bleifnick broke into his ex-wife's home and shot her 14 different times. You might be wondering how their relationship degenerated into this mess. Well, if one thing is obvious, it is that they didn't start this way. They were once a love-struck couple who, at one time, vowed to spend their lives together forever. In 2009, Rebecca and her ex-husband Timothy Bleifnick walked down the aisle where they showed family and friends their commitment to love each other. Tim, although was a celebrated athlete at Quincy University, where he graduated, was working at Quincy Farm Product. Rebecca, on the other hand, was a nurse who loved her job dearly. She was a cheerful nurse who attended to her patients with a broad smile that was capable of sending their ailments packing. Rebecca was exceptional at her job in that she took part in treating affected people during COVID-19, the global pandemic that shook the world to its core. Tim and Rebecca were married for 13 years, and the union was blessed with 3 adorable children. To most people, theirs was the ideal marriage that they hoped to replicate. So where or when exactly did their world burst at the seams and collapse? There are a few pointers, so let us check it out. In 2021, Tim appeared on a game show called Family Feud. It was a popular show anchored by the renowned talk show host Steve Harvey. In the show, contestants acquire points on how popular their questions are. During the show, Tim said something that made the audience and even the talk show host gasp in shock or maybe displeasure. He said his worst mistake was saying "I do" on his wedding day. He laughed and made it sound like a silly joke and then proceeded to say he loved his wife. But hey, who jokes with something like that on TV? However, in 2021, the same man filed for divorce. Now, looking at the circumstances and what he had said on TV, it was clear that he meant every word. He regretted marrying his wife and almost couldn't wait to get rid of her. On the 23rd of February 2023, Rebecca was found in a pool of blood on her bathroom floor. Someone had broken in to kill the mother of 3 and render her children motherless. The person who found her and discovered the blood-curdling scene was her father, William Postle. He had received a call from Tim Bleifnick that Rebecca didn't show up to pick up the children at their school. A very unusual thing, as Rebecca was a doting mother who never joked with her kids. Upon seeing the lifeless Rebecca, the distraught father with teary eyes found his way to a neighbor's house where he called the police. In a twinkle of an eye, the police found the scene and began their job in earnest. When examined, the police realized that there was nothing anyone could have done to save them. The shell casings on the bathroom floor around her showed that she had been shot multiple times by her murderer. Without wasting time, her body was transferred to the morgue, and the real work of nabbing the murderer was set in motion. After the normal routine of questioning anyone who could be connected to Rebecca, all fingers pointed at just one person. Yeah, you guessed right. The title of prime suspect fell on no other person than Timothy Bleifnick, the ex-husband of the deceased. Remember Tim had filed for divorce in 2021? Well, it turned out that their subsequent separation wasn't a peaceful one. There had been a heated custody battle, and before the divorce was even filed, Rebecca had been experiencing a tumultuous marriage. This would not have made it to light if she had not confided in her family and friends. She told people that Tim was violent and abusive. He would often yell at Rebecca and hurl things at her and the children. When the divorce was going on, they agreed to share custody and let kids alternate days at each of their places. But even that didn't work. It was as though Tim was trying to frustrate her into giving up her children. It was a tug-of-war between the ex-couple. At some point, the court had to appoint a guardian ad litem because Tim refused to return a gun that belonged to Rebecca. In case you're wondering what a guardian ad litem does, their job is often to represent the interests of a child or incapacitated person for legal procedure. This individual is usually appointed by the judge, and most times they are lawyers. So, in the case of Tim Bleifnick and Rebecca, the court deemed it fit to appoint a guardian ad litem to represent 3 children, as both parents were finding it hard to reach an agreement for the safety and well-being of their children. Now, for the court to appoint an outsider for their children, it means their marital issues had taken an ugly turn. On December 16, 2021, Rebecca filed for an ordinance of protection against Tim's father because she wasn't sure that her kids were safe with their grandfather. For the matter to have escalated to this point, it must have meant that there was no love lost between the old man and Rebecca. Perhaps it was the old Bliefnick who passed down the violent trait to Tim. It didn't end there. Rebecca, in 2022, started sending a series of texts to her sister and friend. The messages were not cryptic at all. They were a call for help. But it seemed the recipients believed that things would turn for the better. Rebecca wrote to warn them to hold Tim responsible in the event of her death. It was as though she had a premonition of her own death. In March 2022, she told her friends that Tim may lose his mind if he didn't have his way. But to them, they thought the message was about divorce and child custody. The animosity continued between the estranged couple, and by August of 2022, the court had given a detailed order for the safety of their children. They must each stay within 3 feet of the car when taking and returning their kids. Other people came forward to testify to how worn out she looked before her tragic demise. One such person was Melissa Young, who ran into Rebecca at the mall. According to her, Rebecca looked physically drained and mentally exhausted. She looked like someone who had something eating deep inside of her, but she had no idea what. Some neighbors at Quincy also had things to say. They said Tim had started asking strange questions before the death of his wife. For example, he once asked if the neighbors had CCTV cameras in their house that pointed to his yard. On the 10th of February, Tim finally decided to return his wife's gun, a 9mm handgun. He even called the police to see if he could act as courier to deliver the gun because he didn't want to do it in person, but they declined. They asked him to deliver the gun himself, citing a court injunction as the reason. Perhaps they would have taken the gun if they knew what plan Tim had in store for his wife. Things became quite interesting on the 13th of March when a cyclist was seen patrolling the area around Rebecca's house. No one took any notice of this. Perhaps they thought the person had just acquired a new toy and was only playing with it. It's important to note at this point that Tim started window shopping for a new bicycle during their divorce hearings. Tim was so serious about purchasing this bicycle that he even opened a new account on Facebook under a new name, John Smith. Luck smiled at him on the 5th of January 2023, and what seemed like his latest dream was fulfilled. He bought a blue 26-inch Schwinn mountain bike. On the 21st of March, the same cyclist was seen around Rebecca's house, but things came to a head the next day, February 22nd, when this cyclist did something different. Instead of cycling and going back as he had always done, he dashed into Rebecca's house around 1:11 a.m. and forced his way in with a crowbar. The house surveillance notified Rebecca that somebody had entered her house, and she tried calling 911. But sadly, she couldn't place the call before the intruder caught up with her and shot her. By 1:16 a.m., the intruder left the house and headed back in the same direction he had come. All of these movements were captured on a surveillance camera, but unfortunately, the face couldn't be made out easily. More digging had to be done. On the 23rd of March, which was the next morning after the break-in, a neighbor noticed that the front door of Rebecca's house was open, but had no reason to think an awful thing had happened to her. William Postle, Rebecca's father, found his daughter later that afternoon when Tim Bleifnick called him to say that she didn't show up at her children's school, a move that was later found to be calculated. On the 27th of February 2023, police found the bike near the Quincy public school bus, but a real arrest wasn't made until the 13th of August after a rigorous investigation. First of all, similar shell casings as the ones found on Rebecca's bathroom floor were found at Tim's house when a thorough search was made. His phone search history was even more incriminating. He had searched about how to wash off gunpowder, average police response time, and finally, how to use a crowbar. Also, Tim's phone and armband were disconnected from 12:28 a.m. to 2:07 a.m. on the same night that Rebecca was murdered. In this case, the judge ruled that the act was a premeditated murder. It was something Tim had meticulously planned, and it was clear from the bicycle purchase to the phone search history, and ultimately to how he had called his children's school to disallow them from going to their mother's house. In this case, the judge ruled that the act was a premeditated murder. In the end, the jurors convicted Tim on all counts related to Rebecca's murder. He was charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to 45 years in prison in August 2023. While Tim was found guilty, Rebecca's family and friends were regretful and wished they had done something to help her while she was alive. To ease their guilt, they set up a GoFundMe account that amassed up to $100,000 for the children.